Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in Syria, where Russian airstrikes have killed 9 people in northwestern Idlib province. 10 other people were wounded in the attack. Rescue officials say the death toll from the attacks on residential areas in the area has risen to 75 over the last month. Earlier, 19 people were killed in a car bomb explosion in the Aleppo province near the border with Turkey. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accused foreign enemies of sabotage after protests broke out over a rise in fuel prices. Backing the government's price hike in an interview, Khamenei said he understands some people are worried over the decision. He urged the Iranian people to trust the government. One person was killed yesterday after protests in more than a dozen cities were held. Iran's Interior Ministry warned that its security forces will take any action against violent protests. The UK government and armed forces are accused of covering up the killing of civilians by British troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. New evidence from the Iraq Historic Allegations Team, the IHAT, says there is credible evidence that British troops committed war crimes. IHAT is a UK government body, and it was shut down in February 2017 after it reported over 1,000 cases of alleged war crimes. IHAT investigators said soldiers who committed war crimes should be prosecuted for their crimes. The British Defence Ministry, however, rejects IHAT's allegations and terms them unsubstantiated. Operation Northmoor was set up by the government in 2014 and looked into 52 alleged illegal killings. Now, Sri Lanka's Election Commission has declared a former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa the winner of the presidential election. His main rival Sajith Premadasa has already conceded defeat and stepped down from his position as deputy leader of the ruling United National Party. In a statement, the Commission said Rajapaksa won 52% of the votes, while his main rival Sajith Premadasa received just over 41%. Election Commission Chairman Mahinda Deshpriya said voters' turnout was nearly 80%. Rajapaksa won the polls on prioritising the national security slogan after this year's Easter Sunday attacks, which killed over 250 people. The Indian civil society, including historians and academics, have asked for the Supreme Court's Ayodhya judgment to be reviewed. In a statement, they said the decision has caused widespread concern among all those who believe in justice. More in this report.
The joint demand of the review comes from Indian journalists Dhirendra K. Jha and Pamela Philopese. Historian Irfan Habib, academics Jayashti Josham and Badri Raina are also signatories of the request. The statement said top court's judgment is based on criminal destruction of the Babri Mosque, which court itself called unlawful. It says there is not an iota of proof for the top court's assumption that Muslims had stopped praying in the mosque in Mughal and Nawabi times. It also says there is no evidence before very late times Hindus believe Lord Rama was born precisely at Babri Mosque site. In a controversial verdict on November 9th, Indian Supreme Court handed Babri Mosque's land to Hindus.
Well, to Afghanistan now, where the Election Commission has said the vote recount and auditing process will resume across the country today. The recounting was halted after Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah and 10 other candidates protested against the process. Talking to media in Kabul, Election Commissioner Hawa Alam Nuristani said candidates' concerns have been addressed. She said the Commission held meetings with candidates' representatives and discussed controversial points. Accepting the candidates' demands, Nuristani said only biometric votes will be considered valid. The candidates had earlier said 300,000 tallied votes were not biometrically approved and must not be included in the recount. The US and South Korea have postponed upcoming military drills in an effort to bolster a stalled peace talks with North Korea. More in this report.
The decision came just 2 days after US, Japanese and South Korean officials met in Seoul to discuss the alliance and inter-Korean peace. During the trilateral meeting with US and South Korea in Bangkok, Tokyo dismissed any positive outcome of negotiations with Pyongyang. Speaking in Bangkok, Pentagon Chief Mark Esper said the step is not a concession but an effort in good faith to enable peace.
It is important that we all work together, closely, to achieve our shared goals. This means looking beyond and overcoming bilateral issues that harm our efforts and play into the hands of Pyongyang and Beijing.
North Korea has responded by preconditioning denuclearization talks with the withdrawal of US hostile policy.
In the United States, 5 members of a family, including 3 children, have been killed in a mass shooting in Southern California. Police say the shooter committed suicide after going on a killing spree in the neighborhood in San Diego. They said the 4th child is in critical condition and undergoing surgery. Police said they responded to the 911 call, but it was already too late.
Officers arrived on scene approximately a minute after that. They got no response at the door. They went around to the back of the house where they look in a window and they could see a child down covered in blood. They broke out a front window and forced entry into the residence. Once inside, they found several people down, suffering from apparent gunshots.
The U.S. has imposed new sanctions on Cuba's Interior Minister Julio Cesar Bermudez as part of its ongoing economic blockade against the country. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo accused Bermudez of human rights violations in Venezuela. Pompeo said Bermudez was responsible for arbitrarily arresting thousands of Cuban citizens and unlawfully incarcerating, political prisoners. The U.S. Secretary of State called on other countries to join Washington by holding Cuba accountable. Earlier on Friday, the U.S. also expanded sanctions to 5 hotels owned by the Cuban military. Washington does not accept Havana's support for President Nicolas Maduro's regime in Venezuela. In Bolivia, the death toll from clashes between security officials and pro-Morales protesters has risen to 23. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights says 715 more people were injured since the beginning of the political crisis this week. The commission said 9 protesters were killed yesterday. Bolivia's interim government has issued a decree granting impunity to the military for using forces to quell protests. The commission said the decree violates international human rights standards and allows the use of force to suppress mass protests. The UN has also warned that the violence can spin out of control after the death toll rose. Kiev says the process of returning Ukrainian ships detained by Russia is at its final stage. The vessels and their crew were seized last year in the Kerch Strait. Andrei Yermak, aide to Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, said the armored boats named Berdensk and Nikopol will return to Kiev soon. Yermak said Russia aims to complete the process before the Normandy 4 talks. Yesterday, France confirmed the Normandy summit will take place on the 9th December in Paris. Russia freed all 24 Ukrainian sailors in a major prisoner swap between Kiev and Moscow on the 7th of September. Moscow seized the Ukrainian vessels in November last year, accusing them of violating its territorial waters. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break, so do stay with us. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, Belarusians are voting today to elect a new parliament. The polls are being viewed as a litmus test of transparency for the sanctions-hit country, which is looking to mend its ties with the West. 500 candidates are contesting the 110 seats in the lower house of the National Assembly. Over 200 other candidates, mostly affiliated with the opposition, were barred for allegedly not submitting enough valid signatures. Representatives will be elected for a 4-year term. Belarus was slapped with curbs by the US and EU over human rights violations and electoral fraud in 2008. Washington says it can scale back sanctions depending on how this month's parliamentary elections are conducted. President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled the East European country for a quarter of a century, but he has recently allowed some opposition in a bid to foster ties with the West as relations with Moscow sputter. In the Czech Republic, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets of Prague in protest against Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. Protesters demanded Babiš step down over allegations of corruption, but Babiš has denied any wrongdoing. His minority coalition government is supported by the Communist Party in parliament. The demonstration coincided with the 30th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, when communist rule in Czechoslovakia crumbled weeks after the fall of the Berlin Wall. In Nigeria, 3 people have been killed in violence during state polls in Bayelsa and Kogi. The 2 states were voting to elect new governors and a senator. Witnesses say ballot boxes were snatched away by political thugs at 2 local colleges. Chairman of the Election Commission Analysis Center, Adel Jinadu, said reports from observers indicate violence and intimidation of voters and vote buying. He said the massive rigging will undermine the integrity of the election in the state. In Bayelsa, the election was cancelled in some stations following the abduction of an election official and burning of voting materials. Seven members of a family have been killed in a gas pipeline explosion in Bangladesh's southern coastal city of Chittagong. Police say 25 others have been injured in the accident. They said firefighters have joined the rescue operation and the cause of the explosion is still being investigated. Witnesses say the explosion blew off the pipeline's boundary wall, crushing many under the debris. One of the world's most important shipping lanes, the Suez Canal, is celebrating its 150th anniversary. The canal is a short artificial shipping route connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Seas and Asia and Europe. Officially inaugurated on November the 19th, the year 1869, the Suez has since shaped Egypt's history and become a lifeline for the world's economy. The canal stretches from the Egyptian city of Port Said on the Mediterranean Sea to the port of Suez on the Red Sea. Built in 10 years, the Suez Canal is 164 kilometers long and 8 meters deep. In Paris, the botanical garden Jardin des Plantes has organized a light show featuring giant lanterns shaped like sea animals. Though the light display organizers aim to raise awareness of issues affecting the ocean, such as plastic waste and overfishing. More about the show in this report.
The great white shark, crab and pelican lit up the night in a colourful light show at Paris's Jardin des Plantes. Festive lanterns of almost 10-metre high animals range from tropical fish to creatures of the deep. Visitors braved the rain and cold to see the illuminations.
Very colorful. The ocean theme really makes you dream. So with the displays, it really makes you feel like you're dreaming.
The light display celebrates ocean wildlife, raising awareness of the threat climate change poses to the oceans. An intergovernmental organization estimates that 1 million out of the world's 8 million flora and fauna species is at risk of extinction. They blame industrial farming and overfishing as its major drivers.
We first became aware that we're fishing too much. We also became aware of the quantity of plastic in the ocean, that there are enormous amounts of plastic in the ocean. So we want to talk about the ocean through the beauty of the ocean.
The display is open to the public until January the 19th.
Now in business news, the ongoing negotiations between the US and China regarding trade are progressing constructively. China's state media said the two sides discussed each other's concerns and agreed to maintain communication. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer had a joint conversation via telephone. They discussed the first phase of an initial trade pact and agreed to hold more discussions in this regard. Earlier, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said an agreement was close but did not provide a timeline. Saudi Aramco has set a price range for its listing that values the oil giant between $1.6 to $1.7 trillion. The listing will make it the world's biggest IPO. The IPO offering is key to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2020-30 plan to overhaul and diversify Saudi Arabia's economy. Aramco said it plans to sell 1.5% of its shares at an indicative price range of $8. This will value the IPO to over $25.5 billion at the top end of the range. Aramco could beat the record-breaking $25 billion raised by Alibaba when it made its stock market debut in New York in 2014. Well, it's 23 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget you can follow us for all the latest updates on social media at indus.news. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.